Her hand slid up my thigh while I was on my knees, and all I could think was, don't let John see this. Not because of what it looked like, though, yeah, a woman's fingers gripping my leg while I crouched in playground mulch probably sent the wrong message to anyone watching. But because my 4-year-old was currently dangling from a monkey bar, one sneaker untied, and if he fell while I was distracted helping this stranger find her lost phone, I'd never forgive myself. The mulch smelled like cedar and rain. My knees were soaked through. I'd knelt right in a puddle without noticing, too focused on the glint of metal under the slide. The phone case was rose gold, expensive looking, the kind that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Found it, I said, pulling the iPhone from under the slide where it had slid into the gap between the equipment and the safety border. Allison. That's what the screen said when a call lit it up. The caller ID reading Federal Judge A. Brennan. Straightened her skirt and took the phone from me with a nod that felt more like a dismissal than gratitude. I stood, knees cracking like I was twice my age, 20 years old, and I already sounded like I was 40. Night shifts at Denny's would do that. So would 8 months of single parenting on 3 hours of sleep and a diet that consisted mostly of whatever didn't sell during my shift. Thank you, she said. Cool voice. Professional. The kind that made you stand straighter without meaning to, like being called on in class when you hadn't done the reading. She looked at me for half a second. Gray eyes, sharp as the creases in her charcoal blazer, then passed me to where John was now hanging upside down, shrieking with laughter. The playground was mostly empty. Tuesday afternoon, overcast sky, threatening rain, the kind of in-between weather that kept the usual crowd of nannies and stay-at-home parents away. Just us, her, and an older woman on the far bench reading a paperback. He yours? She asked, still watching John. Yeah. She studied him for longer than people usually did. Most folks at the park gave us the sad story look. Young widower, baby on his hip, dark circles under his eyes that no amount of cheap concealer could hide. But Allison stared at John like he was evidence in a case she couldn't quite solve. Her jaw tightened. Her hand curled around her phone, knuckles going white. The call came back. She declined it again, faster this time, and the motion made her purse shift. A stack of papers slipped out, scattering across the mulch like legal confetti. I caught one before it blew toward the sandbox. Heavy bond paper. Official letterhead across the top. Voluntary guardianship petition. State of Tennessee. I've got it, she said, snatching the paper from my hand before I could read more than the header. But she didn't have the others. 2 more pages tumbled toward the sandbox, and I grabbed those too. Couldn't help scanning them without meaning to. The petitioner line was blank. The minor's name was blank. The whole thing was a template, waiting. Our eyes met. Hers dared me to ask. Mine said I wouldn't. You need help? I asked instead, handing them back. She took the papers, tapped them against her palm to straighten the stack with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime controlling rooms, and slid them back into her purse. The leather bag looked Italian, probably cost more than my rent. No, John called from the swings, voice pitching higher with impatience. Dad, push me! 1 second, buddy. Allison looked at the swings, then at me. Something flickered across her face. Longing, maybe, or regret. Hard to tell. You should go. I should have. But something in the way she said it, like she was the one who needed to leave, not me, made me stay put. The rain started, light drops that darkened the mulch and made the metal slide gleam. You come here a lot? I asked. No. Me neither. John likes the tall slide. I nodded toward it. It's the only one in this part of Nashville that doesn't have a waiting line on weekends. She glanced at the slide, and her mouth tightened. It's poorly designed. The angle's too steep for children under 5. The landing zone doesn't meet current safety standards. He's careful. Careful isn't the same as safe. I almost laughed. Almost. The rain picked up. Fat drops now, and John squealed from the swings. Instead, I said, "You got kids?" Her face went blank. Not hurt blank, lawyer blank. The kind of expression that shut doors before you even knocked. "No." "Dad!" John's voice carried across the playground, urgent now. "It's raining!" "Go," Allison said. This time it wasn't a command. It was permission. For what, I wasn't sure. I went, jogging across the mulch to scoop John off the swing before the rain really started coming down. When I looked back, Allison was still standing there, getting soaked, staring at the empty swing set like it held answers she'd spent years refusing to ask for. 3 days later, the hospital sent the final notice. Not a bill. I'd gotten plenty of those. A notice, as in, pay $45,000 in 30 days, or we're sending this to collections and filing a civil suit for the full amount, plus legal fees and interest. I read it twice at the Denny's prep station, grease from the fryer stinging my eyes. Or maybe that was just exhaustion. The paper was crisp, official, the kind of document that changed lives. Marcus, the night manager, leaned over my shoulder and whistled low. "That's rough, man." "Yeah." "You got a lawyer?" "Can't afford one." I folded the paper and shoved it into my back pocket, next to my wallet that held $63 and a photo of Sarah holding newborn John. "Can't afford not to either. But here we are." "Can you afford not to?" Marcus repeated, like I hadn't heard him the first time. I looked at him. Marcus was 50, divorced twice, lived in a studio apartment above a bail bondsman's office, and had been managing the overnight shift at Denny's for 15 years. He knew what it looked like when life had you cornered. "I'll figure it out," I said, because that's what I always said. What else was there? Marcus didn't push. He knew better. But when I clocked out at 7 a.m. and checked my phone in my truck, a 2008 Ford Ranger with 180,000 miles and a passenger door that only opened from the outside, there was a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Hayes, this is Patricia Salazar from First National Bank of Nashville. We've received a legal hold request on your checking account due to an outstanding civil judgment. Your account is now frozen pending resolution. Please contact our office immediately at the following number." I sat in the parking lot and replayed the message 4 times. The sun was coming up over the strip mall across the street. A Dollar General, a payday loan place, a vape shop with bars on the windows. Nashville's version of the American dream. Civil judgment. But the hospital hadn't sued me yet. The notice said 30 days. I'd gotten it 72 hours ago. Unless they'd lied. I called the bank from the Kroger parking lot after dropping John at daycare. Mrs. Chen had given me a look when I handed him over. The kind that said she knew I was behind on paying her, but was too kind to mention it. I'd slipped her $40, all I had in cash, and promised the rest by Friday. Patricia Salazar had a voice like a customer service script. Polite, detached, immovable. The kind of voice that delivered bad news like it was the weather forecast. "Yes, Mr. Hayes, I show your account was frozen at 6 a.m. this morning per a civil judgment filed in Davidson County Court." "What judgment? I haven't been to court. I haven't been served." "I don't have those details, sir. You'll need to contact the courthouse directly. I can only tell you that until the hold is lifted, all funds in your account are inaccessible." My hands were shaking, not panic shaking. Worse, the kind of shake that came from knowing you were about to lose everything, and there was nothing you could do about it except keep breathing and hope that counted for something. "How long does it take to dispute this?" I asked. 4 to 6 weeks, typically. You'll need documentation proving the debt is invalid or the judgment was entered in error. I've got rent due in 5 days. I understand, Mr. Hayes. Unfortunately, I can't release funds without a court order or a settlement agreement from the creditor. Her tone softened slightly. I'm sorry. I know this is difficult. I hung up. The parking lot was filling with morning shoppers, mothers with toddlers in carts, elderly couples moving slowly, a teenager in a Kroger vest collecting shopping carts. Normal people doing normal things while my life imploded. John was at daycare until noon. I had 5 hours to fix this. I didn't know where to start. The playground was empty, except for her. Allison sat on the same bench where she'd dropped her phone 3 days ago. Papers spread beside her, a pen in her hand, moving across legal pad pages with focused precision. She wore jeans this time. Dark, tailored, the kind that probably cost $200 but looked casual. A cream sweater, simple but expensive. Her hair was pulled back in a low ponytail. No makeup that I could see. She looked tired in the daylight. Older than I'd first thought, but in a way that made her seem more real. Not less. I stopped 10 feet away, hands in my pockets. The morning was cool, autumn pushing into Nashville with the kind of weather that made you wish you'd brought a jacket. You said you don't come here a lot. She looked up. No surprise registered on her face. No smile. Just that same even stare, like she'd been expecting me. I don't. Then why are you here? She capped her pen, set it down beside the legal pad with deliberate care. Why are you? Fair question. I'd driven here on autopilot after the bank call, pulled by some instinct I couldn't name. Maybe because she'd looked at those guardianship papers like she knew what it felt like to want something you couldn't have. Maybe because she was the only person in this city who'd looked at John and seen possibility instead of pity. Maybe because I was drowning, and she looked like someone who knew how to swim. I need help, I said. With what? Legal stuff. I sat down on the bench, keeping a respectful distance. My bank account got frozen this morning. I don't know why. The hospital sent a collections notice 3 days ago saying I had 30 days, but someone filed a judgment already. I was never served. Never went to court. But they froze my account anyway. Allison set her papers aside, angled her body toward me. Her eyes were sharp, focused. Judge eyes. When did you receive the freeze notice? This morning, 7:15 a.m. I pulled out my phone, showed her the voicemail from Patricia Salazar. She listened to it twice, her face unreadable. Then she said, "They're lying." What? Not the bank, the creditor. Someone filed a fraudulent judgment to trigger the freeze early, probably hoping you'd panic and settle without reviewing the case. She handed my phone back. It's a common tactic with debt buyers. They file in bulk, claim service at addresses they pulled from old credit reports, hope the defendants don't show up. Can they do that? No, but they do it anyway because most people don't have the resources to fight back. She studied me. You need a lawyer. I can't afford one. Then you need someone who can read a docket and file a motion to vacate. She paused. How much do you owe? $45,000. Hospital bills from my wife's treatment. The words came out flat. I'd said them so many times they'd lost their weight. She had lupus, kidney failure, died 8 months ago from sepsis. The insurance denied most of the claims because of a coverage gap when she switched jobs. Allison's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry doesn't unfreeze my account. No, it doesn't. She pulled out her phone, opened the calendar. Where's your son now? Daycare. I've got until noon. That's not enough time. She looked up at me. Can you get coverage until 6? Probably. Mrs. Chen watches him sometimes. Why? Because we're going to my office, and you're going to learn how to file a motion to vacate a fraudulent judgment. She stood, gathering her papers. Come with me. Her penthouse was downtown, 18th floor of a building with a doorman who called her Judge Hartley, and gave me a once-over that said he was memorizing my face for security footage purposes. The elevator was all mirrors and soft lighting, the kind that made you look better than you had any right to. The penthouse itself was exactly what I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Cumberland River, hardwood floors that gleamed, furniture that looked like it came from a catalog I'd never be able to afford. But it was also emptier than I'd expected. No photos on the walls, no clutter on the counters, no evidence that anyone actually lived here instead of just existing between court sessions. She made coffee. French press. Beans she ground by hand in a machine that probably cost more than my truck. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and dark. She set a mug in front of me without asking if I wanted any. Sit, she said, gesturing to the dining table. I sat. The chair was more comfortable than my bed. She opened her laptop and pulled up the Davidson County Court docket, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the speed of someone who'd spent decades doing this. Within 2 minutes, she'd found it. Med Recovery Solutions ELLC versus Robert Hayes, filed 6 days ago. Default judgment entered yesterday. They served you? She asked, eyes still on the screen. No. Check your mail. Old addresses. Anywhere they could have sent a summons. I've been at the same apartment for 2 years. Same address on my license, my bills, John's daycare forms, everything. Then they committed fraud. She took a sip of coffee, eyes still on the screen. The light from the window caught the silver in her dark hair, made her look almost ethereal. They filed an affidavit of service claiming you were personally served at an address in East Nashville, 1823 Woodland Street. That's not where you live? No, I've never even heard of that street. Good. That's your opening. She stood, walked to a filing cabinet that looked like it belonged in a museum, and pulled out a blank legal pad and a folder thick with templates. You're going to file a motion to vacate the default judgment on grounds of improper service. I'll walk you through the format. You'll submit it pro se. Pro se? Without a lawyer, representing yourself. She set the pad in front of me, along with a pen that probably cost $50. Start with your name, case number, and a statement of facts. Write exactly what happened. When you received the freeze notice, when you checked the docket, when you confirmed you were never served. Keep it factual. No emotions. Judges don't care that you're struggling. They care whether the law was followed. I stared at the blank page. My handwriting looked like a third grader's compared to her precise script. What if I mess this up? You won't. How do you know? She sat across from me, hands folded on the table. Her nails were short, unpolished. Practical. Because you showed up. Most people don't. They get the freeze notice and they panic. Try to work out payment plans they can't afford. Take out more debt to pay off the old debt. You came here asking for help. That's the hardest part. I didn't know where else to go. Now you do. She pulled the legal pad closer, wrote a header at the top in neat capitals. We'll start with the caption. Davidson County Circuit Court. Case number. Your name versus the plaintiff's name. Then we'll build your argument paragraph by paragraph. We worked for 3 hours. She corrected my grammar, tightened my sentences, walked me through case law I didn't understand, but learned to cite anyway. She was patient in a way I hadn't expected. Not gentle, but precise. She didn't coddle me. She expected me to keep up, to understand, to take ownership of my own defense. By the time my phone rang with Mrs. Chen calling to say pickup was in 30 minutes, I had a motion that looked real. professional, like someone who knew what they were doing had written it, not a 20-year-old line cook with a GED and a stack of unpaid bills. "File this tomorrow," Allison said, sliding the pages into a folder with protective sheets. "The clerk's office opens at 8 a.m. Bring 2 copies, one for the court, one for the creditor's attorney. You'll need to mail the creditor's copy certified mail, return receipt requested. Keep the receipt." "What happens after that?" "The judge will schedule a hearing. Could be 2 weeks, could be a month. You'll argue your case. If you prove improper service, the judgment gets vacated and your account unfreezes." "And if I lose?" She met my eyes. "Then you file an appeal, and another after that, and another. You keep going until they run out of moves or you run out of time. But you don't stop. Ever." I believed her. Something in the way she said it, like she'd fought her own battles and won them through sheer refusal to quit, made it feel true. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. She looked away, toward the windows and the river beyond. "Because no one helped me when I needed it, and I know what that costs." The motion got filed Thursday morning. The clerk stamped both copies, gave me a case number, explained the next steps in bureaucratic language that Allison had already translated. The hearing got scheduled for 2 weeks out, September 18th, 9 a.m., courtroom 4B. I texted Allison. "Hearing confirmed. Thank you." She replied an hour later. "Dress professionally. Bring all documentation. Birth certificate, lease agreement, utility bills. Anything that proves your current address." I sent back, "I will." She didn't respond after that. The construction site was a last resort. Marcus had mentioned it during a smoke break. His cousin's company needed day labor for a commercial project downtown. Cash under the table, no questions asked, $60 a day. It wasn't much, but it was something. 3 days of work would cover groceries and Mrs. Chen's back payment. I worked the weekend, hauling lumber, clearing debris, laying gravel in heat that made my head swim and my shoulders scream. The other workers were older, quieter. Men who'd learned not to ask questions about who showed up to work and why. We moved in silence, passing tools and water bottles, finishing the day covered in dust and sweat. On Sunday, the 3rd day, Allison showed up. She stood at the edge of the site in a black suit despite the heat, arms crossed, watching me shovel gravel into a wheelbarrow like I was a defendant she couldn't figure out. The site manager noticed her first, walked over, exchanged words I couldn't hear. She handed him a business card. He looked at it, looked at me, and walked away fast. I set the shovel down and met her halfway, acutely aware of how I must look. Dirty, sweating, probably smelling like the construction site porta-potty. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Making sure you don't hurt yourself before the hearing." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were worried. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." She nodded at my hands. I looked down. The blisters had popped sometime after lunch. Blood mixed with dirt across my palms, and I hadn't noticed because everything hurt equally. She pulled a first aid kit from her purse, because of course she carried one, and gestured to a stack of cinder blocks in the shade. "Sit." I sat. She cleaned the cuts with antiseptic wipes, silent and efficient, her touch gentle despite the sting. Then she wrapped gauze around my palms with the precision of someone who'd done this before, taping the edges so they wouldn't slip during work. Her hands were steady. Mine weren't. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. "Doing what?" "Helping me. You don't know me. John and I, we're nothing to you." She finished taping the gauze and looked up at me. We were close enough that I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the exhaustion she wore like a second skin. "That's not true." "Then what are we?" She packed the first aid kit away, deliberate movements buying her time to answer. You're someone who showed up at a playground asking for help. I'm someone who knows what it's like to need help and not get it. She stood. That's enough. What happened to you? Her jaw tightened. Nothing that matters now. But it did. I could see it in the way she wouldn't look at me, the way her hands trembled slightly as she closed her purse. Something had cornered her once, and she'd fought her way out alone. Now she was making sure I didn't have to. The hearing's Thursday, I said. I know. Will you be there? She hesitated. I can't, conflict of interest, but I'll be waiting outside. Okay. She turned to leave, then stopped. Robert? Yeah? When? It wasn't advice. It was an order. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed running through the arguments, checking my documentation for the 100th time, rehearsing answers to questions I didn't know they'd ask. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Allison. You're going to do fine. I stared at the screen, surprised she was awake. Me. How do you know I'm awake? Allison. Because I am. Me. Why? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Allison. Because I care whether you win. I read that message 5 times, trying to understand what it meant. Trying to understand why a federal judge would care about a 20-year-old line cook she'd met at a playground 3 weeks ago. Me. I'll win. Allison. I know you will. I fell asleep with my phone in my hand and woke up 4 hours later to John climbing into my bed, asking if today was the day we went to the big building with the flags. Yeah, buddy. Today's the day. Courtroom 4B smelled like old wood and recycled air conditioning. The benches were worn smooth by decades of people waiting for justice or mercy or just an answer. The creditor's lawyer showed up in a cheap suit, carrying a briefcase that looked like it had survived 3 decades of courthouse hallways. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me, just set his papers on the table and waited. The judge, not Allison, someone older, a woman with gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, called the case at 9:47 a.m. Med Recovery Solutions, LLC versus Robert Hayes, motion to vacate default judgment. I stood. My hands were sweating inside Allison's carefully wrapped gauze. Robert Hayes, Your Honor. Pro se. The judge looked over her glasses at me. You're representing yourself, Mr. Hayes? Yes, ma'am. Proceed with your argument. I pulled out my notes. The ones Allison and I had worked on for 3 hours. The ones I'd memorized and rewritten and memorized again. Your Honor, I'm filing this motion to vacate on grounds of improper service. The plaintiff claims I was personally served at 1823 Woodland Street on August 29th. That's not my address. I've never lived there. I've never even been there. The creditor's lawyer stood. Your Honor, our process server filed a sworn affidavit confirming service at that address. Your process server lied, I said, then caught myself. Allison had warned me about getting emotional. I apologize, Your Honor. What I mean is that the affidavit is incorrect. I have documentation proving my actual address. I handed my evidence to the bailiff. Lease agreement showing I'd lived at 412 Riverside Drive for 2 years, utility bills with my name and address, John's daycare enrollment forms, bank statements, everything time-stamped before the alleged service date. The judge reviewed them in silence. The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the wall clock ticking. Mr. Hayes, she said finally, do you have any evidence regarding the address where service was allegedly made? Yes, Your Honor. I pulled out my phone, showed her the photos I'd taken yesterday. This is 1823 Woodland Street. It's an empty lot. Has been for at least 5 years according to county records. No structure, no mailbox. No one could have been served there. The judge studied the photos, looked at the affidavit of service, looked at the creditor's lawyer, who was suddenly very interested in his briefcase. "Counsel," she said. The lawyer shuffled papers. "Your Honor, I'll need to consult with our process server regarding—" "Your process server committed perjury," the judge interrupted. Her voice was cold. "And your firm filed a default judgment based on that perjury. Mr. Hayes, motion granted. The default judgment is vacated. The account freeze is lifted effective immediately." She looked at the creditor's lawyer. "And counsel, you can inform your client that I'm referring this matter to the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility for investigation." The lawyer's face went white. "Mr. Hayes, you're free to go." I stood there for a second, not quite believing it was over. "Mr. Hayes?" "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you." I walked out of that courtroom with my documentation, my evidence, and a court order that would unfreeze my account by end of business. I'd won. Actually won. Allison was waiting outside the courthouse, leaning against a stone column, sunglasses on despite the clouds. She didn't ask how it went. She could see it on my face. "You did good," she said. "I had help. You showed up. That's what mattered." And we stood there, two people who barely knew each other, separated by 31 years and a city that didn't care about either of us. I wanted to ask her why she'd helped. Why she'd spent hours teaching me to fight a system she'd spent her career enforcing. Why she looked at John like he was the answer to a question she'd never let herself ask. Instead, I said, "Can I buy you coffee?" She smiled. Small. Real. "I hate coffee." "Tea?" "I hate tea." "What do you like?" She thought about it. "Honestly?" Silence. "I can do that." We walked to the park, sat on the bench where we'd first really talked. Didn't say much. John ran circles around the playground equipment, his laughter cutting through the quiet, like proof that good things could still happen even when everything else was broken. Allison watched him with an expression I couldn't quite read. Longing, maybe. Regret. Something deeper. "I lied," she said finally. "About what?" "Earlier, when you asked what happened to me, I said nothing mattered." She took off her sunglasses, and her eyes were red. "It mattered. 20 years ago I had a choice. I could have taken time off, could have prioritized differently. But I was up for a federal appointment, and I convinced myself it was my one shot. So I worked 100-hour weeks. I skipped family dinners. I told myself I'd have time for children later, after I made judge." She was quiet for a moment, watching John swing higher. Later never came. The appointment came through when I was 41. I threw myself into the work, told myself I didn't want kids anyway, that maternal instinct was just social conditioning. I built a life that was exactly what I'd planned. Prestigious, important, respected, and empty. "Allison, let me finish." Her voice cracked. "Then I saw you two at the playground, and I realized I'd been lying to myself for so long I forgot what the truth looked like. I do want this. Family. Mess. Tiny shoes by the door. Someone who needs me for more than legal rulings. I want it so badly it hurts, and I'm 51 years old and it's too late." I didn't know what to say to that. How do you respond to someone confessing their deepest regret? "It's not too late," I said quietly. She laughed, but it wasn't happy. "I can't have children, Robert. Even if I could, I'm past the age where it makes sense." "That's not what I meant." I gestured to John, who was now trying to climb up the slide backward. "He needs a grandmother. I need someone who gets it. Who understands what it's like to be drowning and still have to show up every day and pretend you're fine? I'm not his grandmother. You could be, if you wanted. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw hope war with fear in her expression. You barely know me. I know you helped me when you didn't have to. I know you care about John. I know you stayed up until 2 a.m. worrying about whether I'd win today. I paused. That's enough to start with. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that meant something was changing, shifting into a new shape. I'd like that, she said finally. If you're sure. I'm sure. A month later, the hospital settled. Allison had made a call. Off the record, she insisted. Just a professional conversation between a federal judge and a hospital administrator about the optics of pursuing a widowed 20-year-old father into bankruptcy over bills that should have been covered by insurance in the first place. They folded. Agreed to settle for $18,000. No interest. 12-month payment plan. I could actually afford that. Allison helped me set it up, walked me through the settlement agreement, made sure I understood every clause before I signed. Then she helped me apply for John's pre-K program. Then she started showing up at the park on Thursdays, my day off, the one day John needed to burn energy, and I needed to not be alone with my thoughts. We didn't call it dating. We didn't call it anything at first. But when she held my hand while we walked John home one evening in October, when she let him fall asleep against her shoulder while we sat on her couch reviewing my application to reinstate my GIS analyst certification, when she looked at me like I was something worth keeping instead of something that needed fixing, it felt like more than just co-parenting or friendship. It felt like home. By December, John called her grandma without prompting. By January, she had a drawer at my apartment, and I had a key to her place. By March, we'd fallen into a rhythm that felt so natural I couldn't remember what life had been like before her. She came to John's preschool concerts. She helped me navigate the GIS certification renewal process. She taught me how to cook something other than diner food. I taught her how to build blanket forts, and why 4-year-olds needed to hear the same bedtime story 17 nights in a row. We built something neither of us had planned for, but both of us needed. 6 months after the hearing, the bank called again. Not Patricia Salazar. Someone higher up, a senior financial advisor named Rebecca Chen, who wanted to apologize for the freeze, for the stress, for the failure of their fraud detection systems. She wanted to offer me a meeting with their wealth management team to discuss rebuilding credit and long-term financial planning. I took the meeting. Allison came with me. We sat in a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Nashville while Rebecca walked us through options: secured credit cards, automatic savings transfers, debt-to-income monitoring strategies. Then she pulled up a projection on her laptop. Mr. Hayes, you've been through hell. I've read your file. The hospital bills, the frozen account, the fraudulent judgment, it's unconscionable. She looked at me directly. But your account activity over the last 6 months shows remarkable discipline. Consistent deposits, no overdrafts. Your debt-to-income ratio is improving monthly. If you maintain this trajectory, you'll qualify for a conventional mortgage in 18 to 24 months. I stared at her. A mortgage? Yes. A real mortgage. A house. She smiled. You're building a foundation, Mr. Hayes. Slowly, carefully, but you're building it. Allison's hand found mine under the table. A house. A place where John could have a yard and a dog and toys that stayed outside. A place where Allison could have a garden and morning coffee on a porch instead of a balcony 18 floors up. A place that was ours. We'll keep it up, I said, voice rough. Allison squeezed my hand. We will. Walking out of the bank that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that kept you moving when everything was falling apart, but the steady kind that made you think about futures instead of just surviving today. Thank you, I said to Allison as we reached her car. For what? For showing up at that playground. For helping me fight. For caring about us when you didn't have to. She stopped, turned to face me. The spring sun caught in her hair, made her look younger. I did have to. You and John, you reminded me what I was missing. What I'd convinced myself I didn't want. She touched my face gently. You saved me as much as I helped you. Then we're even. No, she smiled. We're family. That's better. Real love isn't about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It's about showing up when it's hard, staying consistent when it's easier to quit, and building something solid with someone who sees your mess and chooses to help you clean it up anyway. Allison didn't save me. I saved myself. But she gave me the tools, the knowledge, and the support to do it. And that made all the difference. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.